Why did I allow my mother, who was so abusive to me throughout my entire childhood, to have access to my children? And actually, let's take that a step further. Why did I allow my functional alcoholic of a grandmother who was feeding me to my grandfather, who was a child molester, that word, access to my children? Yep, they all had access to my children. And I carried a lot of guilt for that. And I could not, for the life of me, for many, many, many years, understand why I allowed them to get near my children even for a millisecond. And the answer is it's complicated and also very simple. We'll start with my mother. And by the way, my grandparents are going to be in part 2, because I don't want to make this an extraordinarily long video. I was 17 years old when I had my little baby girl. I had been a runaway. I had been living on and off the streets for the first year and a half of my being a runaway, maybe 2 years. I don't know. Time is a little funny there. And I was gone for a total of 3.5 years. I was a minor. I was 17 years old when I had my daughter. Social services, they come in. They say, you know, you need to do this or that, the other. It felt like they were going to take my baby away from me if I didn't go home. They never asked me why I ran away. Never asked. Didn't ask me if I was afraid to go back home. Didn't ask any of it. Put me on the phone with my mother, who used the magic words, I love you. I'm 17. I'm shell-shocked. I'm terrified. I'd been living as a runaway under an assumed identity, an assumed life. Had this baby that I didn't know, had my little girl that I didn't know what life was going to look like for me. And here's my mother using the words that I longed to hear that seldom came. And when they did, it was for an audience, and not even a handful of times would I hear those words from her. And I leaned right in and I was ready to go home. All forgotten, all of it, because she said she loved me. I get to Montreal, which is where I'm from, and the whole family was together, not waiting for me. I'm not saying they wouldn't have been. I have no idea. My mother's son, my brother, my mother's son was having his engagement festivities. He had just gotten engaged and there were these big parties and a whole thing, and I landed right smack in the middle of it. My mother grabs onto me. I love you. Don't ever do that to the family again. I hear, this is all your fault, but she loves me anyway. And then she takes my baby, my little girl. And she's laughing and she's cooing and she's playing. And I forgot myself for a moment. And like somewhere in there, I asked her, did you play with me like that? Because I have no memories of my mother playing with me, affection. There are no photographs of her holding me as a baby. Actually, I have no pictures from my infancy. I've never seen one, not ever, not once. Toddler, yeah, but nothing with my mother interacting with me. And all the interactions that I experienced with my mother outside of what was for an audience were ones where I was terrified of what was coming next. And here she is, loving on my little girl. And for a moment, oh, by the way, when I asked her, like, did you ever play with me like that? Of course I did. And it was like, no, don't remember that. But anyway, I'm watching this and I'm like, that's amazing. Look at the love she's showing to my little girl. Maybe everything's going to be okay. Maybe like she's going to be the grandmother that I desperately need her to be. Maybe she'll even be my mom instead of this mother who terrorized me. I saw hope in that. What I didn't understand at the time is my mother was just showing me that my daughter was lovable and that I was not. Because none of that kindness, it was just niceness, but for the sake of the kindness, niceness, whatever, none of that affection, none of that love, none of that was going to come towards me. What was going to come towards me was her leveraging my little girl against me. But it didn't happen in a millisecond or in one experience. It happened by chipping away at me over time, by criticizing my parenting in front of my little girl to give her the impression something's wrong with me. When I had my son, which was a little over 3 years later, she barely glanced at him. She made it very clear to my daughter that my daughter was perfect and the golden child. She made it very clear that my son was non-existent. And I maintained the position that she gave me, which was scapegoat, the hated one. And this went on until my daughter was 6 years old, when I recognized how pronounced this was, how damaging this was. And so I went no contact. And I didn't go no contact because of my relationship with my mother. I didn't go no contact because I felt any kind of way in the way that she treated me, because I knew I deserved that. I wasn't deserving of making a decision of healing myself and going no contact. I went no contact to protect my children. Because when I watched my mother in that relationship with my daughter, I bought into what she had told me my whole life, was that I was unlovable, and the way she treated me was actually my fault. Look how she can love that part of me, right? That kind of thing. I never imagined that my mother would do anything harmful to my children until she did. And fortunately for me, when it began and when it was so pronounced and I could see that it wasn't changing, and my mother also became more aggressive towards me during that time, I'm going to come in with a part 2 because this is getting really long. Part 2 of how my mother was escalating her behavior with my children and becoming more aggressive with me, and why it is I gave her access to my children to begin with, and all of that. So if you haven't seen part 1, you might want to go back and watch it. Anyway, part 2. My mother was becoming more aggressive in terms of the disparity of treatment and her nastiness in general towards everybody else. Like, the only person in the room who was being treated well was my daughter. And what I didn't know at that time, and my daughter's now 40, and she has told me this, is my daughter, she's told me that she learned guilt from my mother, from those situations. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, I remember feeling bad for everybody and feeling guilty that grandma wasn't loving everybody the way she was loving me. She also learned how to measure love based on things. She's 40 now, she's fine. But what she was learning in her childhood was, if you got a bigger piece of cake, you were loved more. If you got a better gift, you were loved more. Why? Because my mother was giving her the better things, and things to my son sometimes that weren't even usable, or not, like they weren't age appropriate, or they didn't fit. There would always be, a thing. But where my mother really started to escalate was with me, because the voice I didn't have for myself, I had for my children. And I started to say to her, listen, if you can't treat the children, in a way that's equitable, I don't expect even all the time, because, one has a birthday, they get a bigger gift on their birthday. They don't get even things, right? Different situations call for different things. But I did expect her to treat my children with equality and to show them love in the same ways and all of that. And so I'd say, I need you to stop doing that. I asked her if she would go to therapy with me, that we needed to work on our relationship, that there were things that I needed to talk to her about, and started to find my voice. She got nastier because she knew, nastier towards me. And I would say the divide between my children was getting wider, because she would only take my eldest daughter and refuse to keep my son, which was kind of a gift, but I didn't know it at the time, because I only knew what my children were seeing. He was going to be saved from any other interaction with her. And in private, I don't know what that would have looked like. As I started to find my voice, my mother became more aggressive and was like, I'm not going to be, to blame for how miserable your life is and that sort of thing. I actually have that in writing from her. And the reason she was saying that was because she knew my life was getting good and that I had somebody in my life who was supporting me. And I was not going to tolerate her doing whatever she wanted to my children and to me anymore. So that was the reason that I went no contact. That's why I went no contact. If I had to do it all over again, with the knowledge I have now, I would have never been in a relationship with my mother. But at the time, I was desperate for her to love me. I was desperate to have my family, something I never had. I was desperate to be able to maintain a relationship and have that thing that you see on TV, oh, we'll call grandma, kind of thing, or being able to pick up the phone and sharing what one of my kids did that day, or they lost a tooth, or all of those very, normal things that I never got. I was desperate to be able to have a place to go for the holidays that was my mom, who was never my mom, and give that to my children. Unfortunately, she took that away from them because she can't be a loving and kind person. She chooses not to. She chose not to do therapy with me. She chose not to fix our relationship or work on it. And she chose to continue not only to abuse me, but to attempt to do it by using my children. Now, in the next part, we're going to talk about why I gave my grandparents access to my children. My grandmother, the functional alcoholic. And I say it that way because I think that sometimes when we say the word alcoholic, people have this impression that they're all, falling down out of control and whatever. My grandmother was highly functional. So functional, in fact, that she was able to feed me to my grandfather so that he could do things to me when I was a little girl. CSA. Yeah, that. Stay tuned. Next video, part 3. Okay, so this is part 3. Why did I allow my grandparents, my grandfather, who was a child, CSA, and my grandmother, a functional alcoholic, access to my children? And the answer is I didn't know they were either. I had no context. And going back to my mother, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, but with giving my mother access to my children, who was my main abuser, because I believed that everything she did to me was my fault. I believed that she would never hurt my children because they were everything beautiful and wonderful in the world and I was damaged goods. And what also drove that home is the fact that my grandparents did what they did to me. It wasn't until about 2 years ago that I realized that my grandmother was the person who fed me to my grandfather. She brought me into the bed and then turned over. She brought me into the bed with no clothing. Nobody had clothing on. And I never connected those dots until about 2 years ago. I connected the dots of what my grandfather did to me, which was normalized because my grandmother was there almost 3 decades ago. That's actually what threw me into therapy. But prior to that, all of what my grandfather did and what my grandmother did had been so normalized, and some of it I had repressed. Some of it I didn't even have memories around, and they came out like a flash flood because something triggered them off. I gave my grandparents access to 2 of my children because I didn't know. And if I had known, I still would have thought, unfortunately, I believe I would have thought, and I was in my, we're talking 17 until I was 26. And from, I'd say about 23 to 26, they didn't have much access to my children at all because I was living in a different city in Florida. So that kind of helped buffer a lot of it. And there was no one-on-one access. So because of those small gifts, or massive gifts, really, I should say, my grandfather didn't actually do anything to my daughter other than groom her. Like, there wasn't an actual, thankfully, CSA that occurred. And my son, he didn't have an interest in. Interesting. My daughter was the golden child for everyone, literally for everyone. Anyway, going backwards, even if I had had all of the memories intact, I don't know that I wouldn't have given them access because I truly believe that everything that was done to me was my fault. And I think that that's a lot of the reason why when children become adults and have children, they allow those relationships to carry on within the family, because we're so brainwashed into believing that there was something wrong with us that made people do that to us, that it would never happen to our children. I carried a lot of guilt and a lot of worry and a lot of sleepless nights over whether or not my grandfather had actually done something to my daughter, and she's assured me not. And, you know, I hope it's not a case of she doesn't remember something. I will say that there were, you know, less opportunities, and I just have to hope for the best, because there's nothing I can do about it now other than to be her mom, right? But I think she would have remembered by now. And again, she also had told me something that I knew was moving in that direction, and that's when I really woke up, and that's where I ended the relationship as well. I went completely no contact. Like, there was no delay, no nothing. It was like, okay, I get it, right? It didn't take anything beyond that. I know a lot of families aren't so lucky, and when you're a child and you're born into a situation where you're being abused, what do you have to compare it to? And when you have an entire group of people that are supposed to be your family standing behind the abusers, buying into the smear campaigns, and really kind of I don't even want to say cult, I'm going to say gang mentality against that one child, how are we supposed to grow up and believe anything else? We don't start to believe anything else until we get out into the world, until we have comparisons. And even then, like when my ex-husband would say to me, you know, those things weren't your fault, I'd be like, yeah, I know, because he was pointing it out, but I didn't know. I didn't feel it. I didn't fully believe it. I kind of understood it and I kind of didn't. And it took a long time for all the pieces of the puzzle to drop into place, for me to really understand that when people abuse people, it's because of who they are, the abusers, not because of who the victims are. So I hope this helps anybody that's out there who's going through these struggles of feeling guilty about exposure and the things that you've done. Guilt doesn't serve you. It's not going to help. What's going to help is picking up the pieces and open communication with your children if they were exposed, and dealing with it and moving forward and healing as a family and becoming stronger together.